This Haarfarbentafel hair colour scale consists of 30 variously coloured synthetic hair samples bound to a metal bar in a container made of copper, nickel, zinc alloy. There are 27 hair samples of straight hair and 3 samples of curled hair. In the 19th and 20th centuries, hair scales were key to identifying racial differences and contributed significantly to the creation of racial hierarchies. The Haarfarbentafel was developed around 1907 by Eugen Fischer. He was an associate professor of anatomy and anthropology at the University of Freiburg and represents his attempt to standardise these scales as described in his article, The Determination of Human Hair Colours, which was published in 1907, and his name appears on the back of this the tin. From research carried out by UCL MA Museum Studies students in 2012, we believe that this object was made to order by the German manufacturer and was never mass-produced for commercial use. Furthermore, it's the only example of a Fischer Haarfarbentafel owned by a British institution. The object, as well as being rare, is also valued for its historical and symbolic significance. This particular Haarfarbentafel links 3 central figures in the fields of anthropometrics and eugenics. So Francis Galton, Karl Pearson, and of course Eugen Fischer. And it's highly likely that Pearson and Fischer were professionally acquainted, and it's certain that they were aware of each other's work. The Haarfarbentafel's use at UCL predates its use as a museum object, although it's unclear exactly when it ceased being a scientific object and became a museum object. We do know that Karl Pearson used it for studying Polish and Russian Jewish immigrant children in the mid-1920s when preparing his article on the problem of alien immigration into Britain. By examining both colour and texture of hair, it was possible to make hierarchies more scientific. Cross-sections under the microscope showed that hair with an elliptical cross-section was mainly to be found in black Africans, so-called woolly hair. A circular cross-section was to be found in Asian and Native Americans, and in between these 2 extremes, an oval cross-section was found to be prevalent in Europeans, the so-called smooth or wavy hair. However, it was the German biologist Ernst Haeckel who argued that woolly hair was found in both people and animals, which led to the conclusion that people with woolly hair were further down the evolutionary scale than people with smooth hair, and were therefore subordinate to them. In 1908, Eugen Fischer travelled to German Southwest Africa, now Namibia, to conduct racial experiments in the concentration camps established during the German genocide of the Herero and Nama peoples. Fischer studied over 700 severed preserved heads of Herero and Nama prisoners, looking for and finding evidence of racial inferiority. Women were forced to scrape clean the skulls of the dead using shards of broken glass, and German soldiers packed them into wooden crates for export to race scientists, museums and universities in Germany who had advertised for these prized native skulls, and an estimated 3,000 skulls were sent to Germany. Fischer then went on to conduct anthropological fieldwork on the Basta people who lived at Rehoboth, which is always been in central Namibia. The Basta's racial background led the Germans to perceive them as an intermediate culture between that of the Africans and the Europeans. Sorry, that should have changed. Descended from the mixed marriages of Boer frontiersmen and African women in the 18th century, the Bastas had lived in the Cape Colony before being pushed out by the Boers in 1868. They migrated northwards across the Orange River and refounded their nation at Rehoboth. So Fischer was not encountering a subjugated people. Rather, the Bastas had retained their identity throughout the colonial period and were proud of their singular status. They rarely married outside of their community, and as devout Christians, they kept marriage, birth and baptismal registers that stretched well back into the previous century, giving Fisher the chance to trace families back through several generations. And the other thing that they refused to be stripped naked and photographed, which is what Eugen Fisher did with his other anthropometric subjects. Over 2 months in the summer of 1908, Fisher measured and photographed 23 Basta families. Hair colour was one of the measurements he recorded. Using his Haarfarbentafel, he assigned each person the number of the colour on the scale that most closely matched hair colour. Based on these measurements and further physical description, he grouped the Bastas into 3 racially hierarchical groups: the Oi group, the Mit group and the Hot group, or the Good, the Middle and the Hot, which was a diminutive of Hottentot. Fisher argued that the Mendelian law of inheritance held true, but that it was familial traits that displayed themselves in successive generations rather than the expected racial traits. As a result, a new pure race would not result from crossbreeding. He did, however, argue that Hot characteristics showed dominance over U characteristics. This led him to conclude that every European people that has adopted the blood of inferior races, that of Negroes, Nama and many others that are defective, has, without exception, atoned for the adoption of these inferior elements with their mental and cultural downfall. Accordingly, while the existing descendants of mixed marriages might be useful for Germany, they should not continue to reproduce. His recommendations were followed, and by 1912 interracial marriage was prohibited throughout the German colonies. And this work established Fisher as one of Europe's foremost race scientists. As such, in 1937–8, he organised the Gestapo's Special Commission No. 3 programme that sterilised the so-called Rhineland bastards, the mixed-race children of German women and French colonial or black American troops stationed in the Rhineland after the First World War. In all, 385 children, 201 boys and 182 girls from ages 7 to 17 were sterilised under the 1933 law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring. We know today that 90% of the mothers consented to these operations. They voluntarily understood the need for the operation in response to the offer from the Foreign Ministry that they would otherwise be sent for a re-education in a concentration camp. Each child was examined by race scientists and given a case file, and here's an example. A.A. of German nationality, born March 14, 1920, living in Duisburg, is a descendant of a member of the former Allied occupation forces, in this case a Negro from Madagascar, and shows corresponding typical anthropological characteristics, for which reason he shall be sterilised. The work of Eugen Fisher and other German race scientists using the tools of their trade, including the Haarfarbentafel, was to lay the foundations for the atrocities during the following 8 years committed by the Nazis in the name of racial purity. Thank you very much.